you really need to know but just don't have time to wade through and turn it into actual knowledge. Today, we are strapping in for a massive learning journey, and it's one dedicated to what is, I think, maybe the most misunderstood topic in modern technology, hacking. When you hear that word, most people immediately conjure up these images of sensationalized illegal activity. But our mission today is to move past the Hollywood version.
Way past it.
We're going to embark on a complete guided learning experience into the fundamental concepts of exploitation. We are diving deep into the actual technical foundations, from low-level programming architecture all the way up to complex network maneuvers.
That's right. And we are using the instructional flow of a definitive text in cybersecurity, and we're treating this as an educational curriculum.
A curriculum. I like that.
Yeah. We start with the philosophy, then we progress through the core mechanics of memory and overflows, move into network protocols, and we'll finish up with advanced cryptography and some countermeasures.
So our goal for you, the listener, is not just to summarize these topics.
Not at all. It's to give you a complete foundational understanding of the core rules of computing, so you can recognize the surprising and often overlooked applications of those very rules.
And this is the principle we'll be building toward throughout this entire deep dive. Every single security hole we discuss, every vulnerability, is at its heart a flaw.
Or an oversight.
An oversight in the original system design. We are going to explore why those oversights happen and exactly how they provide an unintended path for execution.
Right. And understanding the rules so well that you can predict where the designer messed up, that right there is the art of exploitation.
Okay, let's unpack this term, hacking. If we're going to talk about the art of exploitation, we need to redefine the artist.
We do.
Hacking, fundamentally, is about finding unintended uses for the rules and properties of a given system, usually to solve a problem. It's a pursuit of elegance and ingenuity.
An intellectual pursuit, absolutely. The source material makes this distinction crystal clear. The essence of hacking is finding clever, counterintuitive solutions. The most important quality isn't malice, it's creativity.
And that applies to both sides of the coin, right?
How do you mean?
Well, it applies equally to a programmer finding an inventive way to write code efficiently, as it does to a security researcher finding a vulnerability.
That's a perfect way to put it. And this is where the dynamic gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The connection between elegant coding and clever exploitation.
Right.
Both the person building the system and the person finding the flaw use the system's rules in these really inventive ways. One aims for efficiency, for clean, minimalist code, which programmers often call elegance.
And the other uses that exact same intellectual toolkit to bypass security measures.
Exactly. When we talk about vulnerability exploitation, we mean leveraging the computer's rules in ways the designers just, never intended.
But programming hacks are basically the same thing.
Fundamentally similar, yes. They use the rules inventively to achieve efficiency or solve a problem with fewer lines of code. This intellectual appreciation for the beauty of a clever solution is what really defines the hacker nature.
I think the classic analogy is a good one here. The maze.
The maze, yes. Hacking is like being presented with a highly secure maze. You're not trying to smash through the walls.
No, you're looking at the blueprints.
You're understanding the geometry and the rules of construction so well that you find the single overlooked path that the architect didn't see.
No, we have to ground this intellectual pursuit in reality because this passion for finding clever solutions often collides directly with legal frameworks.
It does. And those frameworks simply struggle to keep pace with technology. This collision creates a pretty significant legal gray zone, and it often blurs the line between a necessary researcher and, a potential criminal.
We see this struggle documented really clearly in acts like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the DMCA, from 1998 in the United States. The DMCA makes it explicitly illegal to traffic in or even just discuss technology that could be used to bypass industry consumer controls.
And this law wasn't written just to prosecute thieves. I mean, let's be clear.
Yeah.
It was written with the intent to stifle security research and vulnerability disclosure.
I mean, consider the specific examples that are cited in our source material. They're just astonishing. Back in 2001, Professor Edward Felton and his research team at Princeton,
Yeah, this is a great one.
they were threatened with legal action. And they had responded to the Secure Digital Music Initiative's public challenge, which literally encouraged people to try to break their digital watermarking schemes.
They were invited to hack it.
Exactly. But when Felton's team prepared to publish their paper exposing the specific weaknesses they found, they were threatened with lawsuits under the DMCA.
So wait, just to be absolutely clear on this, they were fulfilling the exact challenge set by the industry. They were demonstrating that the system was flawed.
And yet they were classified as potential criminals because their findings dealt with circumvention technology.
That's a perfect example of a system, in this case, the legal system being engineered to prevent legitimate use, and the result is an unintended consequence.
Suppress vulnerability research.
Precisely. And a similar case involved Dmitry Sklyarov, a Russian computer programmer. He developed software to circumvent some simple encryption in Adobe products.
And when he presented his findings at a convention in the U.S., he was arrested.
Yeah.
Based on the DMCA.
Yeah. The law essentially penalized researchers for exposing vulnerabilities or just writing tools that revealed weaknesses, irrespective of their intent to help fix those systems.
And this brings us back to the core concept of exploitation following the precise letter of the law principle.
Right. And it applies to legal systems just as much as it applies to computational ones. The sources point to the classic Lamacchia loophole.
That is a phenomenal analogy for the hacker mindset applied to law.
It is. In 1993, David Lamacchia, an MIT student, set up a bulletin board system for massive software piracy.
Okay.
But crucially, he didn't seek any commercial advantage or private financial gain. He was just sharing. Software companies claimed huge losses, but the charge against Lamacchia was dismissed.
Why?
Because, at the time, the Copyright Act only covered infringement that was done for commercial gain.
No way. So the lawmakers just hadn't anticipated that someone might engage in massive software piracy without a motive for personal financial profit.
They hadn't. Lamacchia used the precise structure of the law, the exact wording of the rule, to sidestep its spirit. He exploited a legislative oversight.
So Congress eventually closed that loophole in 1997 with the No Electronic Theft Act.
They did, but it perfectly illustrates our foundational principle. Complex systems, whether they're legal or computational, can be exploited when their creators just didn't anticipate specific behaviors.
The exploit is always a creative use of an oversight.
Always. And this intellectual foundation is exactly what we need as we transition into the technical roles of low-level programming.
Okay, so if hacking is about exploiting the rules, we have to start with the language that defines those rules for the computer.
Right.
So why is a language like C so crucial for understanding exploitation? I mean, it seems like it's because C sits right in the middle. It bridges the gap between human instructions and the machine's raw logic.
That's exactly it. You can think of a hierarchy of language tiers, which really dictates how close the programmer is to the metal, the actual hardware.
Okay.
At the very bottom, you have machine language. This is raw bits and bytes. The sequence of ones and zeros the processor natively understands.
So it's incredibly cumbersome, I assume.
Incredibly.
Yeah.
And, crucially, it's architecture specific. That means code for an Intel x86 chip is completely unusable on, say, an ARM chip without a complete rewrite.
Okay, so moving up a level, we get to assembly language.
Yes. This is a small step up. It uses names or mnemonics, little abbreviations for instructions and registers. That makes it slightly less cryptic than raw machine code.
And tools called assemblers translate that into machine-readable code.
Correct. But assembly still carries that major roadblock for portability. It's entirely architecture-specific. If you want to analyze an exploit on a different system, you have to know that system's entire assembly instruction set.
Which is a huge pain.
A huge pain. And this is precisely why high-level languages, like C, are really the sweet spot for understanding vulnerabilities.
Because C is much more intuitive, it's readable, more English-like.
It is. And the magic here is the compiler. The compiler takes a single piece of your C source code and it translates it into machine language specific to whatever processor architecture you're targeting.
So that gives you portability.
It does. But the crucial point for us for this deep dive is that C is one of the highest level languages that still gives the programmer incredibly fine-grained control over memory and hardware.
It's close enough to the machine to expose its weaknesses.
Exactly.
Okay, so now let's review the absolute building blocks we need to proceed. We're talking variables, arithmetic, and control structures. Most software runs in a sequential, line-by-line flow. But control structures are what allow programs to change that flow. And that's exactly where exploitation starts, by forcing an unintended change.
Right. When we talk about changing execution flow, we rely primarily on two types of structures: conditional, which is your ifels, and looping, which is your while for.
So conditional statements let the program take different paths based on whether a condition is true or false?
Correct. And looping structures allow for repetitive actions.
Let's focus on the loops for a second. The for loop, which is often used when we want to iterate a specific number of times,
Right.
it's fundamentally just a specialized while loop, but with a counter built right in.
It is. In a C-like syntax, that for I0, I5, I++ neatly packages three distinct actions into one line.
You're initializing the counter, you're setting the loop condition, and you're defining the action taken on the counter during each iteration.
Exactly. And we also need to be absolutely precise about operators and shorthand. Arithmetic is simple, but the shorthand is crucial, and it's often the source of confusion.
Like I plus plus I.
Right. We have post-increment, I++, which means use the value of I, then increment it. And pre-increment, plus I, which means increment I, then use the new value.
That's a subtle difference.
It's very subtle, but these details can lead to really unexpected behaviors in complex memory management.
But the most critical distinction, and this is a classic source of silent programmer error, is the difference between assignment and equivalence.
Yes, this is so important.
We use a single equal sign for assignment. So ISIS means store the value 7 in the variable A.
Right.
But we use a double equal sign for equivalence.
Yeah.
A equals 7 means check to see whether it currently holds the value 7.
And misusing that single equal sign in a conditional statement, so writing if Alexa 7 instead of if a 7, that's an insidious vulnerability.
Why is it so bad?
Because the program will just dutifully assign the value 7 to A. And in C, since 7 is a non-zero value, the condition is evaluated as true.
And the program takes the unintended branch of code execution.
Every time. It's a simple, common oversight that creates a security hole.
Wow. Okay, moving on. We use functions to group repetitive instructions into reusable blocks or subprograms.
The routines, procedures, yeah.
And the programmer provides a function prototype, which defines the function's name, its return data type, and the data types of its arguments.
And that prototype is absolutely crucial because the parameters of the function are key to how the compiler manages memory, specifically how it manages memory on the stack, which is going to be our next major target.
To move from high-level vulnerability detection to actual exploitation, you have to move beyond the C code. You have to see the world from the processor's perspective.
You do. And this requires tools like objdump and the GNU debugger, which is GDB.
When we look at the raw machine code that's output by these tools, we encounter hexadecimal notation.
Right.
So why hexadecimal?
It's the most efficient way for a human to read raw byte values. A single byte contains 8 bits, and since hexadecimal is base 16.
Using 0 through 9 and A through F.
Exactly. A single byte can be perfectly represented by just 2 hexadecimal digits. It's just a convenient shorthand for machine code.
And when you disassemble code using these debuggers, you see assembly language instructions.
Right. Focusing on Intel syntax, you'll see instructions like move, which tells the processor to move data.
And what about things like quump?
Operations like clump, which compares values, and any instruction beginning with J for jump, they manage the execution flow. A jail instruction, for example, means jump if less than or equal to, and it redirects execution based on flags set by a previous comparison.
And understanding that flow is vital because our goal is to hijack those jump instructions.
That is the goal. And the debugger, GDB, is our interactive window into running memory. We use the X command to examine memory contents.
We can reference registers directly, like IPE.
Yes, IPE, which holds the address of the next instruction to be executed, the instruction pointer. If you can change the value of IPE, you control the program, period.
And we can specify the display format with that X command.
You can. IPE2X will show you 2 hexadecimal words. IXes treats the memory address as the beginning of a string, and it reads until it finds a null byte.
And the most important one for exploit analysis.
11. It displays the memory as disassembled assembly language instructions, showing you the compiled program logic.
This ability to interpret raw bytes is foundational to our later discussions on shellcode. For instance, if you examine memory and see the bytes 0 by 48, 0 by 65, 0 by 6C, and 0 by 6F,
you need to know immediately that those correspond to the printable ASCII characters HEEI.
Being able to read and interpret raw bytes and their ASCII mapping is absolutely vital when we start talking about smuggling executable code into memory buffers.
It's non-negotiable.
Okay, moving on. We have to tackle the concepts that scare new programmers but are, well, the bread and butter of exploitation pointers. If you've ever felt intimidated by them, just remember the simple analogy. A pointer doesn't store the data itself.
Right.
It just stores the specific memory address where the data is physically located. It's an address label, not the package contents.
Where they become technically critical is in pointer arithmetic. The data type of the pointer dictates how calculations related to its address are performed.
Okay, explain that.
If you have a sharp pointer, a character is 1 byte, and you increment it by 1, the address increases by 1 byte. Simple.
Okay.
But if you have an in pointer, an integer is typically 4 bytes, and you increment it by 1, the compiler automatically increments the address by 4 bytes.
Why does that matter? What's the point of that?
Because the computer is trying to keep the pointer pointed at the start of the next piece of data in the sequence. This automatic sizing mechanism is designed for programmer convenience, but for us, it shows exactly how the compiler manages data structure size in memory.
Which is knowledge we need when we start precisely calculating offsets for exploitation.
Exactly. And pointers are used everywhere, especially with strings. In C, a string is defined as a contiguous array of characters that must be terminated by a null byte, a 0.
And functions like strappy, which copies a string from a source to a destination, rely entirely on that null termination byte to know when to stop copying data.
And there's the oversight. If a function relies on a null byte to stop writing data, and an attacker can smuggle in a string that never terminates, or terminates exactly where they want it to.
They control the copying process.
They control it. This reliance on the null byte termination is a key vulnerability in so many string manipulation routines.
Okay, so the scope of a variable, where it's declared, that determines where in memory it lives, how long it exists, and who can access it.
Right, and this spatial map is essential for targeting specific data.
We have 3 primary types in terms of scope and persistence. First, local variables.
These are declared inside functions, like an integer inside your main function. They exist at unique addresses within that function's stack frame.
And they're temporary. When the function returns, those variables are cleared and they cease to exist.
Gone. Then there are global variables. These are declared outside of any function.
So they're persistent throughout the program's execution.
And they live in a fixed, shared memory location, specifically the data segment. Because they are at a fixed address, they make excellent, predictable targets for attackers trying to alter a program's behavior.
And finally, we have static variables.
Right. Even if they're local to a function, static variables maintain their value across multiple function calls. Crucially, they are also stored at a fixed address separate from the temporary local variables on the stack.
So the key difference between a local variable and a static one is persistence and the predictability of its location.
That's it.
To understand how to exploit a program, you have to be able to visualize the memory landscape. Program memory is partitioned into these major segments, and each segment is vulnerable in different ways.
This is our target map.
Let's start at the bottom with the text segment.
This stores the actual program code, the compiled machine instructions. It's usually read-only, which is a key security feature. It prevents modification of the running program's logic.
And it's fixed in size. It doesn't change.
Right. Next up is the data segment, which stores your initialized global and static variables. This data is persistent, and it's usually writable.
Okay, and above that is the heap segment.
This is the segment for dynamic memory allocation. This is memory requested by functions like malloc during runtime. The heap typically grows upwards toward higher memory addresses.
And heap exploits are more complex.
They are, because the structure is constantly changing based on the program's allocation demands. It's a moving target.
And finally, the segment that is most critical for classic exploitation, the stack segment.
Yes. The stack is used to store local variables and to manage the entire function calling process. And it operates on a first-in, last-out principle, FILO.
Right. Think of the stack like a stack of cafeteria trays. The first tray you put down is the last one you can take off.
It's a perfect analogy. When a function is called, a stack frame, which contains its local variables and its instruction pointer, is pushed onto the stack. When the function returns, that frame is popped off.
And the stack grows downwards toward lower addresses opposite the heap?
Right. And the fundamental exploit we are aiming for is only possible because the stack's FILO nature means we know exactly what is placed adjacent to the local variables.
The function's return address.
The single most critical piece of information that tells the program where to go next. It's always right there, just waiting to be overwritten by an overflowing buffer.
Okay, now I get to the core mechanism of process hijacking. Exploits revolve around memory corruption, and the ultimate goal is always to redirect the execution flow
to our own arbitrary code.
And this vulnerability stems directly from that oversight in C we mentioned. C lacks built-in safeguards to ensure data fits into the allocated memory space, or buffer.
And that is the buffer overflow or buffer overrun.
If a programmer allocates, say, 10 bytes of data but fails to check the input size, and an attacker sends 15 bytes,
the extra 5 bytes spill out. And they overwrite whatever critical data happens to be stored immediately adjacent in memory. The oversight is a failure of boundary checking.
the consequence is catastrophic. If that overflow is precise enough, it can overwrite a critical adjacent data structure.
Specifically, the function's return address on the stack.
And instead of causing a crash, the program is tricked into executing the attacker's payload, their shellcode, that's been smuggled into memory.
It really highlights the fragility of system security that's built on trust.
We often reference the off-by-one error. If you need 11 posts for a 100-foot fence and you budget for 10, you've miscalculated by 1.
And in programming, that single miscount, or maybe the failure to account for the null termination byte, can lead to the buffer being accessed or written past its allocated boundary.
And that opens up the path for catastrophic results.
Right. And we can categorize buffer overflows by where they occur in memory and what control structure they are designed to overwrite.
The most famous, the easiest to understand, and historically the most impactful, is the stack-based buffer overflow.
It exploits the FILO nature of the stack we just talked about. An overflow of a local variable spills into adjacent data, and it overwrites the stored function return address.
And when the function attempts to return, the instruction pointer is redirected to the address of the attacker's payload.
Clean hijack. Then there are heap-based overflows. These exploit dynamic memory that's allocated on the heap.
And these are typically used to corrupt the control structures themselves.
The metadata, yeah, the data used by the memory management routines. Exploiting the heap is often more complex because the data structure is constantly being managed, allocated, and freed. It makes the target landscape much more fluid.
Okay, a third powerful technique is overflowing function pointers.
Yes. If a programmer uses a function pointer, a variable that holds the address of a function, and stores that pointer adjacent to a vulnerable buffer,
the attacker can overwrite that function pointer variable with the memory address that points to their shellcode.
and the next time the program attempts to call the original function, the execution flow is cleanly hijacked.
Let's look at a generalized exploit technique that is often less obvious than a simple buffer overflow, and this is related to the standard C printing function, print.
Right. This vulnerability arises from a classic yet very simple programming oversight. It's allowing user input to serve directly as the format string in print.
So the mistake is writing print user input instead of the safe version, print % user input.
That's the one. The core problem is that the print function expects a variable number of parameters to match the format specifiers in the format string.
So if the attacker supplies format parameters like %sac, which prints a memory address, or %, which prints a hex value in their user input,
Printf will dutifully look for values on the stack to correspond to those parameters. It doesn't check if those parameters were provided by the programmer. It just trusts the format string.
which leads to the first phase, reading arbitrary memory.
Exactly. By using sequences of the parameters, the attacker can effectively probe the stack. They can step down through the memory addresses until they locate critical data, revealing memory addresses and contents.
And that's key for building a successful exploit payload later.
It is. But the real power, the weaponized part of this, comes from a highly technical format specifier, %.
And what does % do?
The % parameter is unique. It does not print anything. Instead, it writes the number of bytes printed so far to a pointer variable that's supplied on the stack.
Whoa, so this is a two-step dance.
It is. Step 1. We use % to probe the stack and identify the location where our injected format string is being told from. We use this recon to calculate the exact offset.
Okay.
Step 2. We construct the string to place the address we want to write, say, the address of a critical function pointer, or a return address onto the stack. Then we calculate exactly how many characters must be printed to hit the target value we want to write.
So if we want to write the value 12, we print 12 characters.
Exactly. And finally, we invoke %. The function reads the target address off the stack, and it stamps the character count, the value we just calculated, onto that target address.
So you can effectively change values in arbitrary memory addresses using a printing function.
The oversight is trusting the format string implicitly.
To make this exploit faster and more reliable, attackers often employ efficiency tactics, like using short writes via %helloden or similar modifiers.
Yes, this allows them to write just 1 or 2 bytes at a time instead of an entire 4-byte word.
Why is that better?
Well, This ability to target specific bytes is necessary because the target address might be high up in memory, which would require a huge character count. But writing only one byte at a time allows the attacker to write the address value piecemeal, making the exploit faster and less prone to overflow errors.
Okay, we're going to shift gears now from attacking individual programs and memory structures to attacking the communication infrastructure that connects them.
The network.
We start with the theoretical foundation, the OSI model, which breaks down complex network communications into 7 conceptual layers.
And we'll focus on the layers most relevant to exploitation. At the highest level, you've got the application and presentation layers.
This is where protocols like HTTP, POP3, and SMTP live.
Right, and many of these legacy application layer protocols use plaintext structures, which means we can manually talk to servers using tools like Telnet.
This is the low-level communication that reveals that simple oversight, trust in the protocol.
It is. If you use Telnet to connect to port 80 of a web server, you just type head HTTP 1.0.
The server replies with headers, all in plain text, and it often reveals crucial, sensitive information about the server's version and operating system.
The oversight is simply allowing this information to be exposed in a human-readable format.
Moving down the stack, we hit the transport layer, which is dominated by TCP and UDP.
Right. TCP, Transmission Control Protocol, is critical because it provides reliable, bidirectional, connection-oriented data transfer.
And reliability means TCP guarantees that packets arrive in the correct order by using sequence numbers and acknowledgements.
It does, but that reliability mechanism, ironically, is what makes it vulnerable to hijacking.
And below that is the network layer, governed by IP, the Internet Protocol.
IP is just the addressing system. It provides the familiar xx.xx.xx addresses, and it routes packets across the Internet. IP doesn't worry about reliability, it just sends the packet out.
And for the programmer, all this complexity is handled by sockets.
A socket is the abstraction, the endpoint, that handles all the lower layer nitty-gritty details. It lets the program simply send or receive data, abstracting away the complexity of the protocols underneath.
So understanding the protocols allows us to listen in. This brings us to network sniffing and the evolution of network environments.
Right. On an older, unswitched network, like a hub network, Ethernet packets would pass through every device. Devices typically only look at packets destined for their address. But if you set a device into promiscuous mode, using a tool like ifconfig or TCP dump, it causes it to look at all the packets.
So simple, passive sniffing is trivial there.
Trivial. The problem is that modern networks use switched networks, and that presents a serious challenge to passive sniffing.
Because switches are intelligent devices, they maintain a table associating specific MAC addresses with specific ports.
Exactly. When a packet comes in, the switch only sends it out to the port where the destination device is known to be connected. And that thwarts simple passive sniffing on other ports.
So to succeed in a switched environment, we need a clever hack that targets the protocol itself and forces the traffic to come to us.
We need to introduce an oversight into the network's knowledge.
The first trick we need is spoofing, forging a source address in a packet.
And network protocols generally have no strong verification mechanism to ensure that the source address listed in a packet is genuinely the source machine's address.
So this fundamental oversight, the trust in the source field, is a critical element in network attacks.
It is. And spoofing is the prerequisite for active sniffing on a switched network. The technique used is ARP cache poisoning, which targets the Address Resolution Protocol, or ARP.
And this exploit is possible due to 3 specific critical exploitable details of ARP.
Right. Now wait, hold on. If I'm System A, and I just received an unsolicited message from the attacker telling me where System B is, a piece of information I didn't ask for, why on earth does my machine trust that information? Is there no handshake or verification built into the ARP protocol?
That is the core oversight. System A trusts the information because ARP is designed for simplicity, not security. The 3 details are:
First, overwriting entries. When an ARP reply comes in with an IP address that's already in the ARP cache, the system will overwrite the prior MAC address information without questioning its validity.
Second,
No state information. ARP is stateless. It accepts unsolicited replies. A system will accept an ARP reply even if it didn't send out a corresponding request.
and third is spoofing. We can forge the source addresses and MBIC addresses in the ARP replies.
Exactly. So the oversight is that the protocol assumes the network is secure and trustworthy. It's like trusting an old address book to always be correct, even if someone anonymously mails you a change of address card for your neighbor.
And when exploited, these details allow for ARP redirection or ARP cache poisoning. It sets up a man-in-the-middle scenario.
Let's detail the mechanism. System A and System B are communicating. The attacker needs to poison A's cache and B's cache.
Okay.
The attacker sends spoofed ARP replies to A, telling A that B's IP address is actually at the attacker's MC address. Simultaneously, the attacker sends spoofed ARP replies to B, telling B that A's IP address is also at the attacker's MSC address.
The outcome is astonishingly simple and effective. Both A and B are tricked into believing the attacker's machine is the correct physical destination for the other party.
And all traffic between A and B then flows directly through the attacker's system first, which forwards the packets to their true destinations while logging every byte.
And that enables seamless active sniffing on a switched network.
Moving up to the transport layer where PCP provides reliability, we find techniques for actively destroying or seizing control of existing connections.
One simple method is TCP reset hijacking.
In this, the attacker injects a spoofed packet that has the correct sequence number for the current TCP connection. But crucially, it must have the RST or reset flag set.
And the receiving host sees this packet, determines the connection is being terminated, and immediately tears down the session.
Right, and the victim's session just hangs because the communication was hijacked and destroyed.
A far more powerful attack is continued hijacking, which relies on connection desynchronization.
Instead of an RST packet, the attacker injects a spoofed data packet into an active connection using the correct predicted sequence number. The legitimate host machine accepts this data, increments its internal sequence number count, and sends an acknowledgement or ACK response back to the victim.
And here is the genius of the exploit. The victim's machine never saw the attacker's spoofed packet, so it ignores the host's unexpected response because the sequence number in the ACK is incorrect.
Exactly. And because the victim ignored the host's response, the victim's internal sequence number count is now incorrect as well. Both sides of the connection are now desynchronized.
And since the attacker initiated the chaos, they can track the correct, shifted sequence numbers and continue spoofing packets to the host machine.
They are now effectively communicating with the host, while the legitimate victim's connection just hangs, completely unaware that a third party has replaced them.
Finally, we have denial of service, or DOS techniques, specifically amplification attacks.
And this is a highly clever way to execute a massive flood without needing massive amounts of the attacker's own bandwidth. It really exploits the generosity of the internet.
How does it work?
An amplification attack uses spoofing and broadcast addressing to multiply a single stream of packets many times over. The attacker first identifies an amplification network, a network with many active hosts that allows communication to the broadcast address.
Okay.
The attacker then sends a small ICMP echo request packet to the broadcast address of that network, but crucially, they spoof the source address to be the victim's IP address.
And all the hosts on that amplification network dutifully receive the broadcast request. Each one then replies with a corresponding ICMP echo reply packet,
which, due to the spoofed source address, are all sent directly to the victim's machine.
So a single small request generates dozens or hundreds of replies, flooding the victim with a massive amplified stream of traffic and denying legitimate service.
And the design oversight is the willingness of hosts to reply to a broadcast address, combined with the lack of validation in the source IP.
We've covered how to find a vulnerability and how to redirect execution flow. Now we turn to the payload itself, the code we want the victim machine to execute, which we call shellcode.
Shellcode is the small, highly specialized piece of assembly code that gets injected into a vulnerable program. Its ultimate goal is usually to spawn a command line shell, binge, or connect back to the attacker to give them remote control.
And there is a critical difference here between assembly and C that dictates how shellcode has to be written.
Right. C uses standard libraries for portability, which wrap architecture-specific kernel system calls. Assembly, however, is architecture-specific and must make those kernel system calls directly.
So to write shellcode, we need to know the Linux system calls.
And they're identified by number. For example, the exec-to-v system call, which is used to execute a program like binge, is number 11. To invoke it, you can't just call a function name.
You have to load the number 11 into a specific register, like EAX, and load the arguments into other specific registers, like EBX, ECX, and EDX.
It's like the kernel is an office worker who only accepts requests via a specific form. You have to load the request type, which is the system call number, and the required arguments into the correct boxes, which are the registers, before you hit the submit button.
And that submit button in assembly is the kernel interrupt in 0 by 80.
That's the one. And the basic objective is shell-spawning shellcode, executing binge. This often runs into the complication of privileges.
Right. If the vulnerable process drops its effective privileges, say, from root to a restricted user,
You need to restore those elevator privileges, and those privileges can often be restored using a system call like setrasud, which sets the real, effective, and saved user IDs back to root at the beginning of the shellcode execution.
and that ensures the spawn shell has maximum access.
For networking payloads, we need port binding and connect back shellcode. This involves using the DUP2 system call, which is typically number 63.
And remember, sockets are treated as file descriptors. They're essentially temporary files used for network access.
And the cleverness here, the art of exploitation, is using DUP2 to duplicate the socket's file descriptor and swap it with the standard input, standard output, and standard error file descriptors
0, 1, and 2.
of the spawn shell. The result is that the shell, instead of reading commands from the terminal and writing output to the screen, reads its input directly from the network connection.
And it writes its output and errors back over that same socket.
Exactly. It allows the attacker to connect to the specified port for port binding, or wait for the shellcode to call back for connect back to establish a fully interactive remote session.
Okay, so if the exploit is the entry, stealth is the ongoing defense. The co-evolutionary cycle of hiding and detecting is fueled by constantly thinking of things the other side hasn't anticipated.
And the most obvious signs of intrusion are system logs.
So first, we have to understand the operating environment, which usually involves system daemons.
Daemons are just background processes, like a web server or an SSH server, that detach from the controlling terminal. They often handle inter-process communication using signals, like SIGTERM, for a graceful shutdown.
And log files, like those kept by a web daemon, they record connection IPs and request strings.
Right. And even if the attacker deletes the local log file, copies have already been sent to a secure remote server. Our goal is to make the intrusion look like normal traffic.
Which leads us to the log evasion hack, blending into logs.
This exploit targets a critical, subtle oversight. The difference between the function used to receive network input, recline, and the standard C-string functions used to write to the log.
How so?
Recline often uses the sequence arn-caren, so carriage return, new line, as its delimiter. But standard C-string functions use the null byte, 0, as the end of string marker.
So the trick is simple and brilliant. The attacker prepends a valid-looking request string something normal, like gtindex.html http 1.0, followed immediately by a null byte within the exploit payload.
And the logging function will read the request string, stop abruptly at the null byte, and log the entry as a perfectly normal web request.
But in memory, the rest of the payload, including the shellcode, immediately follows that null byte, and it's executed when the program is hijacked.
The log entry looks clean, but the malicious code is already executed. The oversight is the programmer's assumption that the logging function and the input function define the string end identically.
And taking that camouflage one step further, we can achieve true logless exploitation.
This involves actively overwriting the log file descriptor variable, the log_fft, in memory. Since a file descriptor is just an integer that tells the program where to write, we can change its value.
So if we overwrite log_fft to point to standard output or a non-writable value,
every subsequent attempt by the daemon to write to the log file will just fail silently. The intrusion leaves no record on the local machine or any remote log server, achieving near-perfect invisibility.
exploitation is rarely simple, though. We often run into memory restrictions like small buffer sizes or character filtering that prevent us from injecting a clean payload.
This brings us to payload smuggling and encoding. Because SAC addresses can shift slightly due to environmental factors, we need a way to reliably land the execution on our shellcode.
We use a NOP sled.
A sequence of no operation instructions, usually represented by the byte by 90. The idea is that if the return address is successfully overwritten to point anywhere within the NOP sled, the program will just harmlessly execute the NOPs until it slides down into the final shellcode payload.
And that reliably executes it, even if we didn't calculate the exact starting address perfectly.
Right. A more complex restriction is buffer restrictions, specifically when a vulnerable program only accepts printable ASCII characters.
Characters between 0 by 20 and 00 by 7e, like letters, numbers, and basic symbols.
Which means your shellcode has to be constructed without null bytes, or any non-printable control characters, which are often necessary for basic assembly operations.
So to solve this, we rely on polymorphic printable ASCII shellcode.
Since machine code requires specific, often non-printable bytes to load addresses or zero-out registers, we have to find assembly instructions that achieve the desired result while using only printable ASCII bytes.
For instance, to zero out a register like EAX, maybe to load an address of 0.
Instead of pushing a null byte, we can use an AND operation. Since the result of an AND operation is 1 only when both input bits are 1, if we bitwise AND two carefully chosen printable 32-bit inverse values onto EAX, the result is 0x00000000.
And that allows the attacker to achieve core assembly instructions while remaining entirely within the printable ASCII range by passing strict input filters.
So we're going to shift our focus now to the defense side of security. Cryptography, specifically asymmetric encryption.
This is the elegant solution that overcomes the key distribution problem that's inherent in simple symmetric ciphers.
Right. The core principle is the use of two mathematically linked keys. A public key for encryption, which is shared widely, and a private key for decryption, which is kept secret.
A message encrypted with the public key can only be decrypted by the corresponding private key, and vice versa.
And the most popular asymmetric algorithm is RSA. Its security basis relies entirely on the difficulty of factoring extremely large numbers.
The process starts by choosing two large prime numbers, P and Q, and computing their product, N.
And factoring N back into P and Q is computationally infeasible when N is hundreds of digits long.
The math behind RSA is complex, but the steps are logical. We calculate Euler's totient function, which is the count of numbers relatively prime to N.
And when N's the product of two primes, that's just P1, Q1.
Then a public encryption key, E, is chosen. The truly difficult part is finding the private decryption key, D.
And D must satisfy the equation D at D equivalent 1, D equivalent 1.
Okay, let's translate that math into English, because this is where the security lies.
We need to find the one number, D, which is the multiplicative inverse of E, modulo phi n.
Which means D is the number that, when multiplied by E, gives us a remainder of exactly 1 after dividing by phi n.
Correct. And this private key D is found efficiently using the extended Euclidean algorithm. The security of RSA relies on the fact that if you know P and Q, calculating phi n and therefore D is easy.
But if you only know N, which is the public part, factoring N back into P and Q is practically impossible, making D computationally inaccessible.
This robust mathematical foundation, however, does face a potential quantum threat.
Peter Shor's quantum factoring algorithm, developed in 1997.
It's theorized to efficiently break RSA by calculating the period of modular exponentiation, while practical quantum computers capable of this don't yet exist.
The knowledge that a mathematical oversight, the theoretical potential for fast factoring exists, means current security is based on computation time, not unconditional security.
Moving from encryption, which protects data in transit, we look at hashing, which protects passwords at rest. We're going to focus here on the techniques used to break password hashing.
Password hashing uses a one-way function. The entered password is run through a hashing algorithm, and the resulting fixed-length hash is stored.
And that allows authentication without ever storing the plaintext password.
A critical mitigation technique against cracking is the use of salt.
A small, unique, stored salt value is combined with the password before hashing. This means the same password will hash to thousands of different values depending on the salt used.
And this is a direct countermeasure against pre-computed hash lookup tables or rainbow tables.
It is. If all possible passwords and their hashes were pre-computed, cracking would be instantaneous. But with the standard DES-based crypt function, there are 4,096 possible salt values.
Which means a separate lookup table would need to be created for each salt.
And the sheer storage requirement, we're talking 4.6 terabytes just for small key spaces, makes pre-computed tables impractical. The salt forces the attacker to run 4,096 different parallel attacks.
So to combat the time requirement of brute force without relying on that prohibitive storage, researchers developed the password probability matrix.
This is a classic space-time trade-off method. It uses a form of lossy compression.
So instead of storing the full hash lookup table, which is just too large,
this method dramatically reduces the storage space required by 88% in one documented example, by maintaining a matrix that maps parts of the hash output to probable plaintext character pairs.
So when a hash is presented, the matrix quickly returns several thousand possible plaintext values based on probability analysis.
And those candidates can then be checked quickly against the actual hash, converging on the original password far faster than an exhaustive brute force attack. It's a brilliant exploit of the statistical patterns that remain even within a salted hash.
Our final topic covers a widely deployed application of cryptography that failed and failed quickly due to fundamental design oversights. Wired Equivalent Privacy, or WEP, for wireless networks.
Right. WEP uses the RC4 stream cipher. RC4 generates a pseudo-random key stream based on a seed value.
And WEP seed is composed of a 24-bit initialization vector, or FOIThy, plus the secret WEP key. The plaintext message is then XORed with this key stream to produce the ciphertext.
And the crucial oversight was the small size of the AV. The AV space is only 224 possibilities.
So only about 16.7 million possible unique initialization vectors.
Which is just too small to prevent reuse, especially on a busy network.
The most straightforward flaw is keystream reuse.
If two messages are encrypted using the same keystream, which happens often due to the AV cycling, XORing their ciphertext together results in $P plus P22.
And since network packets, the plaintext, have known predictable structures like header information.
If one plaintext is known or even guessed, the other can be recovered.
This predictability allowed for the creation of IV-based dictionary tables.
Right. Due to that small IV space, an attacker can capture enough network traffic over time to generate a table of key streams indexed by the IV. Once this table exists, and it only requires about 24 GB of storage, all subsequent packets using those common IVs can be instantly decrypted.
The oversight was failing to anticipate the speed of data collection.
The ultimate attack on WEP, however, was the highly specialized statistical method known as the Fleurer, Manton, and Shamir attack, the FMS attack.
And this wasn't a brute force effort. It exploited inherent mathematical weaknesses in RC4's design.
The FMS attack exploits specific weak 5Es. RC4 uses a key scheduling algorithm, or KSA, to derive the key stream. The FMS researchers found that certain IVs, those in the specific form of A+3 and 1x, caused the KSA to leak information about the secret key.
The ingenuity is that this attack iteratively determines the bytes of the WEP key in order.
It does. By capturing packets that use these specific weak IVs, an attacker can use statistical analysis and specific knowledge of the RC4 key scheduling algorithm to quickly determine the bytes of the WEP key one at a time.
And this rendered WEP functionally useless in the real world in a matter of minutes. It proves that the oversight was in the cryptographic protocol design itself.
We have journeyed through an immense technical landscape today. We've traversed the logic of low-level C programming all the way to complex network maneuvers and the cryptographic math underpinning security protocols.
And the synthesis of this entire journey, I think, confirms our starting thesis. Hacking, at its core, is an art. It's built on deep technical understanding, observation, and creative problem-solving.
The core takeaway remains absolutely constant. Vulnerabilities exist in all complex software and networks the world depends on. They are simply an inevitable result of complexity and the fast pace of development.
New countermeasures, stack guards, intrusion detection systems, more robust protocols, they're constantly evolving, but they are not perfect.
Never perfect. A hacker's ingenuity tends to find holes and oversights in every new system.
And if the law tries to suppress this knowledge, it nearly leaves those vulnerabilities undiscovered, increasing the risk for malicious actors to exploit them in secret.
The knowledge itself is not the crime. The knowledge is the necessary foundation for security.
That's right. Technology is always changing and expanding, so there will always be new hacks, ambiguities in protocol specifications, programmer oversights, and unexpected configurations.
Your mission, having absorbed this deep dive, is to expand upon this knowledge by continually figuring out how things work, wondering about the possibilities, and most importantly, thinking of the things that the developers didn't think of.
The art of exploitation is an endless pursuit of discovery.
And that pursuit starts with curiosity.
Until next time, keep digging.